and everybody can welcome Jason Welch, our lead developer here for IDX.
Check, I got this one. All right, how are we doing? Good? You guys good? I'm so excited to be here. So, yeah, so we're going to be talking about modernizing legacy applications tonight, so hopefully it's going to be really good. I'm excited about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first. Did you turn this off on me? Jerk. Okay, so my name is Jason Welch. I'm the lead application engineer at IDX. This is actually, I'm going on 9 years at IDX, so I've been here a little while, so it's going to have a big old party in a little bit. You can find me on Twitter at JW Welch, if you want to do that, or you can email me at IDXBroker, jason@idxbroker.com. This is actually the second talk that I've given this week. The first one, and so I could be losing my voice a little bit or whatever. My first one was last Sunday at church. I was talking to the high school students there, and so I'm trying to keep my content separated from that one. And so if I slip up, I'm sorry, because last week I was actually talking about sex with the high school students, so hopefully we're not talking about that tonight. So I'll try to keep it PG for you guys tonight and keep it code related and not go back to where I was on Sunday. So with that, let's get started. We got a lot to go through tonight, and I want to cover as much as possible. A huge shout out goes to Paul M. Jones. He wrote this book called Modernizing Legacy Applications in PHP, and it's a great source. We bought this as a company and kind of read it, not together, but just is available for us to read. And I read it, and I was like, this is amazing, and I kind of modernized one of my very first applications. If you want to grab it, it's on LeanPub, and it's super great. What I love about it is it actually gives you code examples and shows you step by step how to take code and modernize it. It's not a lot of books that I've read are very theory based, and they don't really, so you have a hard time, or at least I have a hard time translating that from, okay, I get it, to how would I actually use that in real worlds. And so he gives great examples of real world use cases, and then he actually gives you some extra packages and things like that to make it easier to modernize your code. So when we're modernizing our code, there's two different approaches you could take. You can go with the rewrite, or you can go with refactoring. Rewriting is basically ground up, scrapping everything you have, and you're going to start fresh and write an entirely new application, the same thing. A refactor is the process of restructuring existing code without changing its external behavior. And so as we go, so rewriting is the more kind of, as developers, it sounds way more exciting because we want to work with Vue.js. We just learned about Vue.js, and so we want to build our app with Vue.js, or we learned about React, or we learned about, we're so excited about Laravel, and we want to use Laravel. And so we want to rewrite from scratch because we don't want to work on our existing code. But there's problems with rewriting. There's the context switching problem. And so let's say as a company or as a person, as a developer, you want to rewrite your application or modernize it. How you're going to do that? If you try rewriting, you're going to get to this where you're trying to split your time between your old project and your new project. And you're trying to work on the new project, and then a bug comes up. So you got to switch over to the old project, and it's just, you're not very productive because you're having to switch between the two. There's also the knowledge problem. And so as you're rewriting as a company, we're going to hire more developers to get a new application to use to modernize our code. The problem with that is when you hire new developers and you assign them to maybe the new system or the old system, they don't know enough about the system to do it well, and so they're not going to be very productive because they don't know about all the problems, the goals, the best practices. And so even 100% hiring or increase in programmers is not going to give you any more kind of benefit. It's less than 50% increase in output. So just hiring new developers to rewrite an application isn't really going to pay off. And then the schedule problem comes up when you're trying to rewrite from scratch. And this is where you dedicate all your developers to rewriting. And then so here's your old application, legacy code, you don't want to work on it anymore. So we're going to turn all of our attention over to this new rewrite. And we're just going to let that sit there stale and hopefully just maintain itself why we rewrite an entire application. And this one's super tempting, and as developers, we get really excited about it. So we overestimate our ability to perform. Laravel is so great. It's going to make our lives so much better. We can do it so much faster. And so we overestimate our ability to do it, and then we underestimate how long that's actually going to take to do it in the first place. And so our overconfidence and optimism morphs into frustration and pain because it's taking way longer to rebuild what we already had in the first place. And then all the while, our old application that isn't doing anything, our clients are getting frustrated because there's no new features, the bugs aren't being fixed, or anything like that. And so a great quote from this book, because this is kind of like where we were at IDX when we were doing a rewrite. It says, the rewrite project will, at the end, become a panicked death march to get it done at all costs, and the result will be a code base that is just as bad as the first one, only in different ways. It will be merely a copy of the first system because schedule pressures will have dictated that new features will be delayed until after the initial release is achieved. And so you had this great idea to rebuild an application from scratch, and you're going to do all the best things. You're going to do it right the first time, and then all of a sudden, it took longer than you expected, and it's a death march, panic death march to get it done in time. And so at IDX, we tried to do that. We tried to rewrite. We had a V1, and we're going to we want to rewrite it. And so it took us about 2 years to do, 4.5 if you take into start to finish planning, kind of database migrations as well, which is a really long time to do that. And it worked. We had a stable product in V1, and so that kind of helped. We did kind of everyone, all hands on deck, go rewrite this thing, and we're just going to leave V1 to kind of be stale and work. And fortunately, it was good enough to maintain. But even then, we had a billing system that crashed. So we spent a day going back to update the old V1 billing system. And so we're still switching between contexts, stuff like that. So it was a tough process. And you're not really getting to build new features because you're just trying to feature match old to new as you're rewriting. So it's tough. Here's another quote. Netscape made the single worst strategic mistake that any software company can make by deciding to rewrite their code from scratch. So those are why you don't want to rewrite your code from scratch. So the answer is iterative refactoring. So the program, basically the idea is the program is improved in small steps without changing the functionality of the program. So you basically take a small change, is added to the system, you test to make sure that it works, and then you deploy it to production. And then you repeat that over and over. Small change, test that it works, deploy to production. And over time, the system becomes easier to maintain and improve. So that sounds really good. There's a few drawbacks to it. It's small, but I'll kind of go over them for you. Refactoring is less appealing. You don't really want to do it. A rewrite sounds so good because you want to start with the really good, new, cool thing at the start. You want to start with Vue.js. You want to start with Laravel. You want to start from the outside and kind of go in. Refactoring is harder because you got to start down in the weeds. And so you have to continue working on the system as it is with warts and all. It's not very much fun, but so you got to get your hands dirty a little bit. And you don't want to you don't get to switch over to the latest, hottest framework, like I said. So you can't use that right away. And you don't get to do things right the first time. And as developers, we like to work on new projects. We don't want to work on old code that other people have written very much. We'd rather build new things. But the benefits, I think, highly outweigh the drawbacks. So individual refactorings themselves are small compared to any similar portion of a rewrite project. So you're doing small little changes over time. And so it can be applied in much shorter periods of time. And so if you're an agile development doing sprints, you can take a sprint, do these changes, fix it up, go from there. And at the end of each iteration, you're leaving your code in a working state, which is awesome. Your code is never broken. You're never stale. It's always working. With refactoring, it can be integrated into a larger process with scheduling that allows for cycles of bug fixes, features additions, and refactoring to improve the next cycle. So as you're refactoring, oh no, this billing bug came up and we have to kind of all hands on deck switch over, fix up this bug, as you're refactoring, it's not a big deal to do that. So you just go fix your bug, do that thing, switch back to refactoring through the steps. You can also, if there's a new feature that you really need to stay competitive, you can switch off your refactoring, go into fixing or making that feature, and then jump back to it. So small steps towards an easily visualized goals can be accomplished in short time frames. So you can do these things pretty quickly, which makes you more flexible as a developer, as a company, as you go forward. And so each small refactoring win will both improve morale and drive enthusiasm for the next refactoring step. And so the goal of any single refactoring is not perfection, it's actually improvement. So it's easy, we want to have the perfect code, and this is where we are as a team right now. We always debate, what's the perfect thing to do, that's not perfect yet, which is really hard to do, because it's like, hey, we're going to just take what we can right now on this piece of code, and I'm going to do the best. I can't refactor, I can't change all this other stuff here, but I'm working on this little piece of code here, so I'm going to do the best that I can with this little piece. And so if we do that as a team, over time, those small little changes that we make is going to improve the system as a whole. Adam Wathan gave a talk at Laracon called, I think, Chasing Perfection. You should check it out. Mind blown for me. I loved it. It was really good. So over time, these small wins accumulate into a single really big win. And so you'll have a fully modernized code base that never stops generating revenue for the business. So sell that to your managers, because that's a great way. Hey, we're going to update our code, but at the same time, we're going to still generate revenue for you. So let's get coding. We're going to actually go through code. We're going to go through my first ever PHP application, and we're going to modernize it tonight. So I love code. I love nerding out about code, so hope you guys will do that with me. So this is my beach cabin in Yachats, Oregon, and my family has a scheduling. We had an old scheduling system on how to reserve dates. And so I built my very first application is this. It's an event calendar where you can log in, and then basically we're competing with sides of the family for which weeks we can stay. So my week is the green week, and then the other side of the family is the blue week. And so I just compete with my brother, my dad, and my grandma for staying at the beach cabin during a weekend. So when you click on a date, you go here to an add calendar event, pick the number of days, and then you add the event, and then you can view the registration or view the event that you have. And then there's also a registration, there's a login, and a password that you can change. So it's a pretty straightforward application. There's not a whole lot to it. Here's the folder structure. We've got our PHP files here. Activate, so very similar, very kind of basic. It's an include-oriented structure. So I have a header, and then a body, and then kind of a footer. And so we'll kind of go through that code real quick. So here is my details page.php. This is including the header at the top. It redirects if the date is invalid. We show the user's name if they're logged in. We redirect if they're not logged in. And then we have some database query things to get the data. We handle a post request if they wanted to cancel the reservation. This is where we output the HTML of who's staying during this day. And then we also show the cancellation form if they own it. And then lastly, we include the footer, which will just kind of output the HTML. So the header just starts a session, outputs HTML. You guys don't need to see all the code. I'm just trying to give you an overview of how a page is structured. The header then outputs navigation if they're logged in or not. And then the footer just kind of closes out the HTML. So kind of a basic PHP application from old school back in the day. And so this application was built based on Larry Ullman's book that I read, Visual Quick Start Guide to PHP 4 or something. I don't know if anybody's read it, but that was how I started programming and coding. So thank you, Larry, if you're watching. Thank you very much. So step one, as we're going to modernize our code base, is we're going to install Git into our project. If you don't know what Git is, it's a versioning control system. So it gives you the freedom to basically create a branch off of your code, make a bunch of changes, and then if you like it, you can merge it back in, or you can just kind of scrap it and go from there. So all you have to do is git init if it's installed on your computer, git add all, and then git commit -m initialize, and you are off and running. You can now play with your code all you want and never feel like you can't get back to a safe place. Step 1, as we refactor, is going to be add auto loading. This is going to be a composer, git composer init. And basically we have an autoloader here. I created an app directory, and now and that's where all my kind of code is gonna go to. And so it's namespaced to Ocean Crest, which is the name of our beach cabin. In hindsight, I would probably just namespace it app because it's shorter to type, and Ocean Crest doesn't give me that much benefit. So that will get us auto-loading, and then in our code, all we have to do is this top line. We're going to update our header file and include the autoload.php file that Composer auto-generated for us. And so basically that means any files, any classes that we put into the app directory with the Ocean Crest namespace, it will auto-load into our application. So we don't need to do an include or require everywhere we want those classes. It's auto-loaded for us. Huge benefit right there, right off the bat. Once you do that, pat yourself on the back, grab a beer because you're like rolling and your app is getting more modern as you speak. So the next step is to consolidate your classes and functions. So you're going to remove all the include calls, because we have our autoloader, that load up a class and function definitions. So my application is so old, I don't have any classes. But if I did, I'd find an include class call, I'd move that class into my new app directory, and then I'd remove that include statement in the code that included it. I would test it, commit it, notify QA that I made a change, and then repeat that until all your code has no more class definitions. But I didn't have to do that. So if you're working with really old code, it might be an added benefit for you. And then we're going to consolidate our functions into classes. So basically here we go through, we find where we're including a function file or we're calling a function, and then we're going to move that into a static method call. So I'll show you an example of that. This is, I'm not sure what file this is. I think it's anyone. It doesn't really matter. But so I import my database. So I create a new class called DB. I put that in my app directory, and so when I use Ocean Crest, that auto-loads the database class for me. That's all I have to do to load it. And then down here, I have the escape data function. That is a MySQL kind of escaping, so we don't have SQL injections. And then instead of calling escape data, which is like a global function, I'm calling a static function db escape data. That's all you got to do. Update the call static method. And then this is inside the code. This is the new class. This is my DB class that I built. I basically just copied the function and then put public static in front of it. So a lot of copying and pasting in this process, which is not a bad thing. We're decoupling all of our code, so it's okay to copy and paste. We're not duplicating, we're decoupling. The next step is to replace global with dependency injection. So we remove all uses of the global keyword. This can be really hard depending on your application. So any global you have, I'm thinking of IDX and all the globals that we have. So if we remove all the global keyword from our classes and then we inject them into the constructor instead. So this is that DB class that I just showed you. There's a global DBC, which is our database connection. And so I remove that, and then inside the constructor for the class, we inject the connection. I also updated the name, so I call it connection rather than DBC, because what is DBC? 6 months from now when you come back and you're reading your code, you have no idea what DBC means. So don't use abbreviations if you want clean, readable code. That's like just a little tidbit for clean code. So call it connection so you know 6 months from now it's connection. And then so we just have no DBC anymore. We don't have the global because we injected it. And then when we call DB escape, we new up the DB class with the dependency of the connection, and then we now just call it like a stat or any kind of method on a class. And so we have to do this for super globals as well. So anywhere you have server, post, get, we have to change all of those. And so this book that I'm going through gives you a request object. And so you can, in the header file, I do new up request, pass in the globals, and then I had to do a little hack here to get the server in as well. But that allows me to update all of the places in my code where I'm referencing global variables, and I'm referencing the request object instead. And so what this is doing is decoupling, so it's going to be easier for us to test in the future. So I replace session with session, and then post with request post. So once we go through all of our code base, remove all the global variables, then we go to this next step, which is we replace new with dependency injection. So again, depending on your class or your application that you're modernizing, it might not, mine has no classes, so I didn't have to really worry about this. But anytime in one of our classes in our apps directory, if it's new upping a class, then we need to basically inject it through the constructor like we did with the global variables. But I didn't have to do it in my case. So now we've kind of decoupled our request. We've decoupled the globals out of there. We don't have these function includes. So now we can write some tests. And this is where PHP unit comes into play. So with our composer file, we can install PHP unit. We create a test directory. You pick a class, and then for every public method in that class, you write a test. Sounds daunting. It is. If you don't know much about testing, it's a challenge. And this is really the first testing that I ever did. And a lot of it was just, I'm going to write a dumb test. I don't even know if this is really that good, but at least it's a test, right? So the book highly says don't skip this step. Depending on how big your app is, though, this could be a really long step. But it's freeing when you do. So once we have tests for all of our code, we now get to extract all of the SQL statements that we have splattered everywhere in our application, and then we're going to move those into a dedicated gateway class. And so we're extracting our logic from the page, which again allows us to keep things separated, and it makes our code more testable. And so here is my add event page. So basically when they want to create a reservation, based on the duration, the number of days they want to stay, I've got two different SQL statements, one for multiple days and a single day. So we take all of that code, and then we basically paste this into a new gateway class and a function that I called reserve. And so now I new up an event gateway, pass in the database connection as the dependency, and then I call event gateway reserve. I pass in the family, the date that they're staying, and then the number of days that they're staying for. And so my code is now cleaner, and it's more readable. I know exactly what's going. I don't have this giant chunk of code. And looky here, we have tests as well. So I've written a test, and so I can pass in this data into the reserve class or reserve function, and then I can verify that what I passed in is what I am expecting in the database. So I've extracted code and made it better because it's testable. So you do that for every single SQL statement in your application. Once you're done with that, you move on. Do you have a question?
I see a lack of prepared statements.
Yes.
Why would you not also switch to prepared statements when doing that?
Because, well, I never considered it. B,
That deals all with all the SQL injection.
Yeah.
Which what I just saw still is SQL injection.
yeah, so SQL injections, you can put all the, I have like an escape, that's what the escape data function was for, is to escape and basically prepare, make sure it's clean. Yep. So you can do that, again, depending on your server setup too, you might not have PDO or those things installed. So, yeah. So you kind of got to roll with what you got as well. But if you want to take that, you can. One step, I think the main kind of idea here too as well is that you're just kind of, you're not really fixing or improving your code, you're basically just decoupling it. You're extracting it so that when you come back and want to make prepared statements and test that these things are invalid, you have tests for them, and so you can refactor and make it better. So you don't want to introduce a bunch of bugs as you're trying to go through and refactor as well. Another question? Yes.
And this is instead of rewriting everything. But you still want to add features to that, like in a company situation.
Yeah.
The idea is that you're adding features parallel with
Exactly. Yeah. So that would.
You don't have to wait for a complete rewrite to add your first feature.
Yes.
But you refactor to make it a little bit better and you add a little bit
Mm-hmm.
more. You refactor a little more.
Yep. And that's the challenge where. Yes. So the question was, do you? Can you repeat your question? I had the answer, but I don't know what the question was.
Yeah, in a company,
Oh, as a company, as you're wanting to add new features, when you're doing this refactoring, are you trying to improve your code at that point, or are you trying to just do it? And I think that's kind of, as a company, as a developer, as a business, you need to decide what's the best approach for you, because it's going to be a trade. There's trade-offs everywhere, and so you're going to have to either, are we going to stay within this kind of pattern that we've been going in and stay consistent there, or are we going to introduce kind of these new things with this new feature that then might make things more confusing? So you
have a list of features you want to add and a list of desired refactoring to kind of prioritize.
exactly. Yep. Yeah. So you can prioritize refactoring. You can sprinkle, like if you're a sprint-based company, in this sprint we're going to refactor some code and add these new features at the same time. And then the challenge there is figuring out how you're going to do that without stepping on each other's toes. Yep. And maybe you do your refactoring in a separate branch entirely, and then you bring everything over. So that, there's different ways to do it, but that's probably the hardest part that you're going to be dealing with. Fortunately for me, it was just a single app that I was the only developer, and it was not going.
So you're not adding any new features in this?
Yes, there's no new features added in these steps. Yep. Yep. So the next step is after we've done the SQL stuff, is we're going to extract our domain logic into transactions. And so the domain logic, extract domain logic to one or more classes so that we can test them independently. So let me just give you an example here. Oh, this is like the most demanding step. This is probably going to be the hardest, longest thing. And again, there's no modifications or improvements to the domain logic itself. Any changes are just enough to get the data into our new transaction classes. And any existing problems are now testable problems. So I think there was one thing I was like, man, this is a bug. It's driving me nuts, but I just pasted it into the thing and said, I'll forget about it, and we'll test it, and we'll write it. We'll fix it as we go. So this is the activate page. This is where a user will register, and then the super user gets to go to this page to verify and activate that registration. And so what it does is it calls our event. We new up our database. We get a user gateway. And then we call the activate method on our gateway to do the database update, switching the Boolean or whatever for that. And then we output whether it succeeded or failed to the DOM, to the web page. And then we also send an email to the user notifying, hey, we just activated your account. Here's where you can go to log in and things like that. And so this is our domain logic. The domain logic here is we're activating a user and then we're sending an email to the user. So we're taking that logic and we're kind of putting that into a service coupled together that we can test. And so we've basically taken all of this code here and then we've put it into a new transaction. So we new up our database, we get our user gateway, and then we pass in the user gateway into our user transactions class, which then we call user transactions activate, which is the same as the database. But the activate transaction is doing the email sending notification, and it's doing all the things. It could be 10 different things that you have to do when you activate an account. All those things are going to be in that one place to activate the account. And then lastly, we're going to output the success or failure. And so we've kind of put that code together, and then we've also, which is right here, the activate method, we call the database, and then we send the notification. And then you can write a test for that thing. And so you can test that when we call activate, we send an email, and then you can test your failures as well. So once you've extracted all your domain logic, that's a quick slide, but that's probably the longest time that you'll spend. The next is presentation logic to view files. So we've got all these echo HTML things throughout our PHP script that basically we want to separate that out into its own layer, separate from the business logic, and we're going to, then we can test those as well. So we're going to put that into a new views directory that we create. And one step part of that is our bootstrap app here. So let me jump here and then go back. So this is our headers.php file. We've extracted the non-presentation logic out of here. So we've removed kind of the session start and the OB whatever starting things, and we've moved those into a bootstrap file. All the non-presentation logic we've taken out of here. We've taken our header.php file and moved that into views partials header.php. And so this is only presentation logic that is contained in this view file. And then so our new bootstrap start.php file has the error handling at the top. It has the autoloader, the database connection, starting the server, and then new upping the request object. And so all the non-presentation logic is moved into this file. So we've extracted those out. And so in our details.php file, we don't need the header or the database connection anymore. We replace that with start.php. And then any of the echoes that we have in there, so all the presentation logic, so here I'm echoing the logged in user's name. Instead of echoing that, I'm saving that and storing that to a variable. And then we're going to pass all those variables. As you can see, name is right here. We're going to pass those variables into the view. And so we, with this package, it gives you a new response. And we point it to our views directory. We set the view to details.php because that's the page we're on. And then we pass in any of the data that is dynamic that's going to need to be on the page. And then we call response send, and that actually outputs everything all at once. So we've created basically a templating system. And so you could use Twig or something like that, one of the new modern kind of PHP things if you wanted to. And so here's the template file for views details.php. So now it's got the echoing of the name and the variables that we've passed in specifically. So the views are only concerned about the HTML logic. We're not concerned about anything else. And then what is this? Oh, this is a test. So again, this view, this presentation logic is testable. So given this data for this event, I'm expecting to see that this is the output on that page. So your views are testable as well. Step 9 is going to be extract action logic to your controllers. And so this is where you're going to kind of rearrange your controllers. And basically our controllers are pretty similar. We've got our dependency injection at the top, kind of all the things that we need. And then in the middle is kind of like all of our action logic, all the stuff that needs to happen. And then at the very end, we've got kind of the outputting, the echoing of that. And so this is details.php. All the action logic here would be validating the day, verifying the user's logged in, getting the event data from the database, canceling or handling the reservation cancellation, and then adding all of the template data into that response object. And so basically we're going to copy everything in the yellow box there, and we're just going to paste that into our controller. And so now when we do that, we have an event controller that we include into our dependencies, and then we new up an event controller. And so that takes the request, the event gateway, and the response, all those things that were required in there. And then we just call the invoke method on there, and then we send the response output. So as you can see now, our details.php is down to 16 lines. It started off around 80, I think. And all of our code is getting more testable as we go here. And you can see a lot of duplication here. We're getting our dependency, we're starting up the app, and then we're getting any kind of we're new upping any classes that we need, and then we're sending the response. So make mental note of that, because we'll come back to it. Replace includes and classes. So we need to replace include calls with method calls through our classes. So I don't have any of these, but this is if you have like a validation include or something, and so all your validation kind of functionality is in an include file in a class somewhere. Depending on that, if it's just a single include one time, you're just going to kind of copy out of that function and then paste that directly into the class. If it's done multiple times, then you're going to create a new class, put all of that logic into the new class. You can write a test for it, and then call the class from there. But I didn't have it, so I didn't really pay attention to that step as well. This next step is public, and you're going to separate your public and non-public directory files. Not a huge step. This could be a really big step depending on how big your app is. You might have to get your systems admin involved, so it can be kind of a big step. But you're basically getting ready to do some routing. But all mine are in public. Everything I don't want in public is not, so it wasn't a really big deal. But you can see all these classes that I have here on the left in my app directory, so a ton of classes. And we basically just moved all the code. We haven't created any new code. We're just kind of moving it around to different places. And check out our test directory. We now have 50 tests that we're running and 65 assertions that are passing. So our code is better. We've moved around and we've tested it so it's better. So now we want to get ready for routing. So we're decoupling our URL paths from our file path. So right now, if I go to /details.php, it's loading the details.php file and then echoing that stuff. But we want to get to it where we can go to any page and route to anywhere we want to. And so basically, you're going to create a front.php file like this. You're going to include the start.php. You're going to include, you're going to new up a router that comes with the book as well. You can do a basic router. If you wanted to get crazy, you could use and modernize things. You could use Laravel's router. Like Laravel is a PHP framework. You could just extract their router and start using their router instead of the one included in the book. So as you're doing this, you could be preparing yourself for a better framework, possibly. Could be a little bit more challenging, but it's something to consider. So we're going to so we're creating a new pages directory. So instead of HTML, which is our public directory, we're creating a new pages directory that's non-public, and we're going to move details.php out of the public directory into this pages directory. The router is going to go check and say, oh, I'm trying to go to details.php, I have it, so now I'm going to redirect, or now I'm going to require, which is line 14 right here, I'm going to require details.php. And then I created this thing is really cool. This is a little hack here, but it says if the controller is set, so we've required details.php, if that file includes a controller, then we're going to send the response. We're going to use the response controller and then output it. But doing this down here frees me up. So I knew I was probably going to go to a different framework once I decoupled everything. And so I wanted to leave my authentication system alone. I didn't want to upgrade it at all. And so you've noticed I've only been talking about my calendar page, my details page, add event page. And so I've left login.php. I haven't updated those files at all. So now on the router, if it says I'm going to login.php, it's going to include, require, there we go. I muted it. Unmute. So the cool thing here is login.php still has my really old school header file. It's got all the old kind of process of checking for sessions and doing that stuff, and then including the footer.php file. But it still works within this new modern framework that I'm going for. So if you have a giant app and you can't modernize everything at the same time, you could essentially piecemeal these over at a single time. And so this freed me up. When I deployed it live, I was able to just kind of remove a file from HTML, and then it auto redirected. It was like the coolest thing ever. So it was kind of like a slow deployment without mass breaking everything. Really, really cool. And so we're just basically front.php. So this is where you got to set up your server. Everything is going to hit front.php. Every time they go to details.php or calendar page, whatever page they go to, it needs to hit front.php. And this page is then going to figure out what to include, what to require. And you do that via htaccess or talking to your server admins, or if you're working locally, I think I built a server.php file to do it. So you're seeing a little bit of repeated logic in these page scripts. Kind of the steps are the same. You're loading a script, you're instantiating the dependencies, then you invoke the controller, and then you send the response, the output. And so all of those scripts inside pages directory are pretty similar. So here we've got our dependencies, and then we do our kind of logic, and then we send the response. So we're going to remove the duplication, which is every page is we're going to remove start.php because that's already done in the front page. So back here on front, we include start, and then we're going to require details. So we don't need to start anymore, and we don't need to send to the response because we're already doing that in front.php. So we're removing. Good. I think I'm good. Yep, I'm good. All right, and this is the last step. This is the coolest step ever. So you're noticing, like, when we new up classes, we have to do new database, and then we have to do new event gateway, and then we have to do new event transaction, because that requires the gateway, which requires the other thing. And so if we have that mixed out throughout our app, we're new upping all these classes everywhere. But a dependency injection container basically gives us a single spot to new up all of our objects in one single place. So all of our object creation happens in a single place. So back to our front.php, we're going to now include bootstrap services.php. That's our file that is creating all of our objects for us. And then instead of new router, we call the di get router, which is dependency injection router. And so that's going to pull the router out of the IOC container for us. And then everything else is basically the same as it was before. And so our services.php file looks like this. So we build the new dependency injection. We pass in all of our globals. And then if we set database, so anytime we need a database, we can do di get database. And that's going to do whatever's in this closure here. And so caveat to that is you got to be on a PHP version that's high enough for closures in order to have a dependency injection container. So that's why this is the last step, because some of you might be on like 5.2 and you can't do closures, and so you're out of luck. 5.2? I don't know. I know, like, my personal hosting is 5.3, I think, so I'm super old school, like that. So if you need a response, the only time you need to new up response, it's done one time right here in our services. So we don't have to we don't have all this duplication of how to new up a class anywhere. Our router, we can set what routes need to be routed to. So here I've got calendar.php, calendar with no .php. So I can switch out where you don't have to have the .php if you don't want to. And then those are going to go to whatever controllers. And then so here's, I changed it from event controller to reserved event controller. And so that requires the request, the event gateway, and then the response. And so the one time, it's all done once right here. And if you noticed in my code, I had this really gross like session checking on how if a person's logged in or not. I add this line right here, which is get middleware before I go to the route. And so that way I have a single place. I'll show you right here. So this is my dependency injection for middleware. And so that's basically verifying that a user's logged in when they need that authentication. And so this is really gross PHP code. I don't like it at all. Kind of hurts my heart when I look at it. But it's really gross code that's only in one place in my application. And so I can come in and create a bug ticket and come in and fix how I want to do this kind of redirection or authentication one time because it's in my dependency injection, or it's in my container. And so I've got get new middleware here, and then any of the other routes that I go to that needs the middleware, I just have that call one time. So that's pretty sweet as well. All right, so our app is now, once we got our dependency injection container, we're all good. Our app is modernized. We're ready to go. If we want to move it into Laravel, it's going to be a little bit easier because we've got tests. It's decoupled. And this is what our app looks like now. It's the same thing. No difference. It hasn't changed whatsoever. But we now have 50 tests verifying that everything is working as we expected. We have 65 assertions verifying that these things are happening when I'm expecting them. And so that gives us the freedom to go in and now refactor our code, improve those bugs, make things cleaner, make things better because we have the confidence in the tests that we've written as we've refactored here. and then that'll eventually get you to a point where you can then do a bigger upgrade and do more features and things like that. So this is after I'm not a UI or front-end developer, so as great. But so just a little, I made it responsive, updated it a little bit, and so here's some newer, better look for the app. But again, it's 100% testable. I made a ton of changes. The weeks were all off, and so I wrote tests to figure that off because it's a weird system. Calendar-like stuff is really difficult. So with that, thank you very much. That's how you modernize an application in PHP. Does anybody have questions? Well, thank you. I will now take any questions about sex or coding, whatever you want it to be, since I didn't mix things up. So, just kidding. Let's not talk about the other. We'll talk about coding. Yeah?
So it's not a question, but it's more of a statement.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there aren't too many places where you can go. There aren't too many meetups where you can go and hear somebody like you, a lead engineer, stand up in front of a crowd and talk about either refactoring or rewriting code and kind of talk about it happily,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, there's some people here in the room that are just entering into the industry, and I think that you're doing a real service by talking about the things that, most engineers are probably less likely to do unless they have to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Everybody wants to write new code.
Yes.
Everybody wants to create something, make something, but this is a part of being an engineer.
Yeah.
And so it's a real, I think, service above and beyond by just talking about it, right?
Cool. Thank you.
Setting an expectation.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if we can, like as developers, it's the grind of dealing with old code that we don't like, that we didn't write. But if we can get excited about it, get excited about this one little change that we're making now, IDX, or like our code at IDX is rough. Like there's a lot of spaghetti. There's things that I wish I could change. There's decisions I've made that I wish I could go back and undo. But as a developer, we're always growing. We're always getting better. We're always learning new things. If you're not, then you might want to look into a different profession because things are changing all the time. But our code is pretty static. And so you've got to get excited about going back and working with old code and trying to modernize it. That's what I love about this book is that it gives you those steps through. We've tried to do some of that at Laravel, or not at Laravel, but here at IDX. But and then the challenge is how do we update things without making things more complicated. And I think those are just fun conversations to have all around. So, yeah.
Just a couple of observations. One is, I forget who said it, but it's correct. But it usually takes about 3 goes to get your code where you're actually happy with it. The other thing is, the hardest thing about refactoring is persuading them to control the money.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Usually, it's obvious to all the engineers. It's just the people who are paying for it that might decide.
Yes. Yeah, so he said, just for people listening possibly, he was talking about how you get people in charge who are paying your bills to go in and do a refactoring or updating of your code when the payoff is, you can't really see any of the changes, right? Everything is the same. So what's the benefit? How do you sell this to your managers and say, hey, we need to refactor our code? Obviously, it's like that hockey stick effect, and at IDX, we've been in a hockey stick effect forever, but if you take a little bit longer time now to kind of really refactor and set things up, that's only going to speed things up for you. And I feel like we're finally at a point right now where we're kind of at the tip where we're going to start really developing new features, not just kind of maintain and kind of rewrite things. And so, yeah, that's definitely a challenge. And it's hard to sell that to your managers. But if you can get buy-in like, hey, this is going to improve things, and if you can put out new features while refactoring at the same time, that makes it a little bit easier as well. And then possibly update performance at the same time or something as well.
Would you say that it's good to know what kind of features you're going to want to add,
Mm-hmm.
because that's going to tell you what kind of refactoring to do?
Yeah.
In other words, certain kind of features in mind that might suggest one type of refactoring, and with a different type of
Mm-hmm.
features in mind that might suggest another.
Yes.
How to make it easier to
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Yep. So he was talking about based on what features you might want that might adjust your refactoring approach. And so I knew that I wanted to go into like a Laravel framework because I love Laravel. I think it's just great code. I just feels good when I'm programming in Laravel. And then you have to go back to old code and then it hurts. But with that, so I was able to, I changed my approach where I only had to refactor those pages that I was worrying about. But also you got to be careful that you don't think too far in the future of, oh, I want this feature that's going to be really good. So in IDX, we rewrote our application, and we had these great ideas for this, oh, this is going to be a game-changing feature once we build it. And so we set ourselves up for these features that 6 years later, we've never actually created. And so now we have kind of code, code debt in our code because we never have built these features, but we have this kind of logic, these conditionals and things like that, looking for these features or trying to handle these features that never actually came to fruition. So it's a balancing act of, okay, I think I might want this feature, but I also don't want to set myself up if we don't use it. So the challenge, I think, we wanted the features. We didn't think they would be, A, they wouldn't be as big, they're not as big as we thought they would be, and B, it adds a lot of complexity to the system, and so we would have to creating a UI around adjusting these features would be very difficult. So we kind of wanted like a route, specific routes that clients could create. Like if it's a really expensive house, then it would go on this special kind of SEO path. And then if it's just kind of a standard house, it would go on this non-one. And so it was a great idea, but I don't think it would have paid off in the end. So we just have code in there that we don't use. So yeah. So here at IDX, we are a real estate data company, and so we kind of have two different sides. We download MLS data from all of the real estate listing services around the United States and other countries, and then we standardize that data. And then, so that's our acquisition team. So they have a whole, all they do is kind of download data all day long. It takes forever, and it's crazy because MLSs are crazy. And then our job on the application side, we call it the output team, is we build features around that data. So we build a search for the real estate data. So I kind of say we're like a Zillow, if you know what Zillow is. We're essentially a Zillow for a specific real estate agent. So we wrap all the searching and stuff around, or we wrap a client's website around our search tools of that data. So a map search or a details page of a listing property, or searching for properties, basically, is what we do. Antonio?
So what is there one obvious indicator? Should I refactor or rebuild?
Yeah.
Is there something you come across?
Man, I kind of wish at IDX we try to refactor. Don't tell my boss that because he'd probably be, I know. So, shoot, he's probably watching, and I would like to have tried it because I'm curious what we lost by doing a rewrite and taking those 2.5 years to rewrite it in the first place. And like I said, I feel like now we're finally at a point where we've got it stable enough, and so we've had to rewrite our application, but we've also had to rewrite the database, kind of how we download and store all the data as well. And so we're finally kind of done with both of these rewrites that we've done, and we're finally at the cusp of where we can start. So you have this challenge of old and new code. It's like it's so hard to like. We want to build this new feature, but we still have to support all this old code, and so it's just it's a tough balancing act. And so if you're refactoring, updating everything at the same level at the same time, I'm curious if that allows you to build new features on top of existing systems. So I don't know if that answers your question, or like when you know for sure. I'd say if your application is at a stable enough point and you don't really, I would always default to refactoring at this point. Like when we say at IDX, I hear people say, "Oh, we need to rewrite our lead management system." I just like cringe and die inside a little bit because I'm like, no, like we need to refactor that. Like let's try to add some tests and make our code better, and then worry about a rewrite because I know how long that's going to take and things like that. So rewrite for me is like a cuss word at work, so I would prefer refactor.
One obvious place where rewrite is necessary is to change the platform.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you decide that you want to move to Rails rather than PHP.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're changing platforms, rewrites might be, you might have to do it. Or also, yeah, even you've got to, everything is a trade-off, like I said before. And so as you're considering refactor, rewrite, like microservices or a new, application structure, maybe you want to go to that. And so, but I think there's always these trendy things in coding, like, oh, I want to try the latest new thing. Like microservices are really hot right now, so I'm going to build a microservice. But maybe that's not the best solution for you. So it's going to be like case by case for sure.
The kind of rule that I've always heard for deciding whether to rewrite or refactor is if the platform you're on is constraining you enough and there's no clear path
Mm-hmm.
to address those constraints,
Yeah.
then it's time to do a rewrite.
Yep.
But as long as you're not like engineering past what your platform allows, then the rewrite is totally unnecessary and a giant time sink.
Yeah. Yep.
Then you probably start.
Yeah, so if your code's constraining you enough and you can't do what you want to do in your platform, maybe a rewrite. Yeah. So we, like at IDX now, we have this kind of hybrid system because we wanted to like introduce some Laravel features like the IOC container, the dependency injection, kind of the event system. So rather than when you activate like an account like I did, rather than inside that action logic, you're sending the notification, we wanted to have an event system that said, hey, a new person's activated, I'm alerting this event that just happened, and then you have listeners that listen to that event, and then, oh, a new activation, I'm going to now notify them via an email, and by doing that, you're saving the load time for the page because they don't have to wait for that email to send before the page goes back to redirect. So we basically have a hybrid Laravel application right now. So we have non-Laravel code, Laravel code, but we've been able to port all the Laravel stuff that we want in our non-Laravel code in some way. So, but that's also creates a ton of complexity at the same time.
For something like email notifications with like a message broker,
Mm-hmm.
sending it off somewhere else completely independent of your page load or even the server is handling pages,
Mm-hmm.
make more sense?
Well, yeah, that's one of the benefits of putting it in an action logic. Is another step that we could take would be to, for that, when we basically can put something in our IOC container that says, I need a notification system, get that for me. I don't care what notification system it is. I don't care if it's email or pusher or some texting thing or whatever. We have a specific interface for sending notifications out of our system, and then our IOC container, we can switch it behind the scenes and say, oh, in this case, I want to send a text message, or this case, I want to send an email. You can just pass in that notification system into that action transaction class or function. So.
You got to take the business into consideration too, right? Because like it's very common that in most organizations, 20% of the code is generating 80 or 90% of the revenue, and
Mm-hmm.
it's working. Well, maybe it's worthwhile just to let it go, right?
Yeah. Yep. You're always worried about everything is going to be a balance between what the business wants, what we want to do as developers. And so we're sprint based, and so we try to take into account what the business wants, what we want as developers, because we're trying to speed things up and optimize things, but we also have to build new features. So, yes. You had a question?
Yeah, so a lot of programmers, when they write code, they don't have unit testing in mind.
Mm-hmm.
So they write code, and then after a while, the code base becomes really big, and they need to start writing tests.
Mm-hmm.
But their code is not written in a way that's unit test friendly.
Yes.
So you need a lot of refactoring.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering if you had any experience with that at IDX and what kind of problem.
Yep. So yeah, we're kind of there. We have, right now we're using PHP spec for our unit tests, and we have no integration tests whatsoever. And so we're trying, this year is the year we're trying to like get into testing and get that installed. But the challenge is we've got so many globals and new classes kind of spread throughout the application, and we have really big files. So I was looking at an AJAX, kind of a controller. It's kind of a controller file, basically. It's over 1,000 lines just for this one page. To create an account, it's over 1,000 lines of code. And so the refactoring at our scale would take a very long time. Like, it would take maybe the amount of time it took to rewrite. I don't know. And so the challenge of getting tests in is, I would say, just get them in. Try to get it in there. And so we just haven't had time to really like get the unit test going. So we have some tests, but integration tests is where I would really like to see us. Like when I go to this details page and we have a listing with this data, I'm going to see, you know, this on the output. And then that way, kind of the new trend in testing is start from the outside, kind of the integration kind of level, and then dig down into the unit level when you need to. But that opens you up to refactor your code. So you're not tying your test to the exact implementation of how you're going to be getting all of that data. So that doesn't really answer your question, but I would say just start writing tests. If you want to get better at unit testing, I think the challenge for me, because it's like there's not like a great book that I've seen. I've watched a couple really good talks by Adam Wathan and some other people that I follow on Twitter that have done some really good things. Laracast.com is Jeffrey Way's kind of Laravel screencast. He's got a series on a test-driven forum from scratch. Really good at testing. He's also using Vue.js, so that's great. And then there's another one as well. Ticket Beast, guy writes an app. So watching other people do it is good. Another thing you can do is just kind of go in GitHub and like maybe there's a package that you like or something like that, and then just kind of read through the unit test. Because I think my biggest challenge is like, okay, I'm doing this and I'm making a reservation. What do I need to confirm in the database, and do I use my test here? I'm actually have a test database set up. So I have my database is called OceanCrest, and then I just called it OceanCrest_testing, and that's where I can, I think every time it ran, it cleared the database and then would insert stuff as if normal. So it was doing like real database kind of queries and things like that. So just writing, just trying to get in and write, get that PHP unit installed, step 1. Step 2, just start with a single class. And maybe start small, smaller classes, and then go to the bigger ones. Like at IDX, we have like a results page. I don't think I would start there because our results class is like so big. Like I would start maybe smaller and then kind of build up to bigger classes.
Besides making your application run better, maybe make it be more efficient, like be able to reduce some lines of code, or is it essentially about the same?
I made my code more readable. That's number 1. And that, for me, I love readable code because it's fun to read. When I can just, I don't know what the stat is. I think it's like 90% of developers read code rather than write. And so if you're writing readable code, you're making your life in the future better because you've written it for yourself 6 months from now. So you're not figuring out what DBC means. Your brain isn't having to make that kind of little connection to figure out what DBC means. You know when it's called connection, that's my connection. So your brain doesn't have to work as hard when you're reading that code. So there's little things like that to clean up. I was more focused on just trying to get everything decoupled and separated. And then once you've got those tests, then that's where I would go through and kind of clean things up. And but there's a lot of commits. So all this code is on GitHub. There's like over like 90 commits. I think there's around 80 commits in there. And there's a lot of cleanup things that I'm doing. Like I was doing like full cap comments and things like that just looks weird. But I don't know why I did it, but I did, yeah. It's a public repository. So I can, I don't think I have it linked to in this, but Antonio, do you have like show notes or something, or web dev thing?
Repository for every single talk.
Cool.
So every talk will have a README, and I will add all the slides and every resource
Cool.
that Jason
Yeah, so all my slides and readmes and stuff we'll have that for Eugene Web Devs. Yep.
Regarding the testing, like what do you write your tests for? The
Mhm.
strategy I found helpful is to implement coverage reports.
Mhm.
So you have a pretty good idea of what, well, not even a good idea, you have a solid idea what is actually being executed while your tests are running.
Yeah.
And then looking at things that are commonly used by a lot of different things. So things that are a lot span into a lot of different modules, and then writing the tests on that stuff first.
Mhm.
Since that's the areas that if you break something in there, it's more likely to break a lot of your application.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying test coverage? There's a test coverage package or something that you can run, or they'll have that show you. Does it actually show you like what line? I think it says lines that aren't covered or whatever. Yeah. Yes. Nice.
It's super nice, and like where I work, or I'm just going to affiliate with them, it's part of our building system. So any commit
Mhm.
to the system automatically gets a coverage report generated.
Mhm.
So when we're doing code review, if we're looking at the tests and going, I don't know if they wrote a test to cover this, cover this new code they wrote, we can
Mhm.
look at the coverage report
Yeah.
and know for sure or not.
Yeah. So it's very handy when the deployment has your tests automatically running and.
Or just the build service.
Yep, the build. Yeah.
But regardless of what it was deployed.
Yeah.
I mean, I would hope most development shops people have build service.
Yes. And there's stuff out there that you can use for that too. Like, Travis.io, I think. Anything else? All right.
So, we have one more question over there.
Was it having refactoring based on that book that you talked about?
Yeah. So all those steps were kind of what he kind of laid out in the book, and then he gives code examples as well. And so I actually started on one recommendation I have: if you guys have side projects, do them. If you're trying to get started or whatever, just create an app. If you have an idea, you can create an app for that. I love Star Realms. It's a game on my phone, and I started a league, and they manage everything in Board Game Geek, and I'm like, this is the most inefficient way to track like who played who and who won. I could write a web app to do this real quick. So if that's you, I don't have time to do that. But if that's you and you're starting out, find something that is inefficient that drives you nuts and create a web app for it. And you put it on GitHub and allow people to do it. Check it out. Put it on your resume. Yeah, when I got hired at IDX, I had no development professional experience. They hired me part-time support, part-time developer because I was building up a resume. My brother was a designer, he would design it and I would build the pages for him basically, but it wasn't like anything like majorly official. And so just build up your own side projects, and then you have fun things you can refactor later on in the future as well. Yeah?
And just to add to that, if you're having trouble thinking about a project, just Google for coding challenge.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a few sites out there.
Yeah.
Where they'll give you some proof, you can choose what level of difficulty you want to. You'll get some pretty. That's what with the advantage you can then see other people's solutions as well.
Yes, exactly.
And even further, people's solutions as well as doing it yourself.
Yes.
What I've found out is that yes, it's good to have a project of your own, but you also have to be disciplined and say, I'm going to finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Because the first 90% is usually easy.
Yeah.
It's getting it that last 10% when you find out what you'll
Mm-hmm.
make it harder for
Yes. Yep. Yep, I think codewars.com. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yep, codewars.com is one of those websites that you can go to. There's different challenges, different languages, so depending on what language you're into. The cool thing, you can post your own challenges, which I did that. I have another web app for my family gift exchange we do at Christmas every year. We have different rules for it. My aunt was pulling names out of a hat. I'm like, I can write you an app to do this really quick. And so I wrote her an app, and it was cool because it's actually more complicated than it seems. But so I posted a challenge for how to pull names out of a hat based on these rules. You can't give it to a person you gave to last year and things like that. And it's cool being able to see, I've got a solution, but being able to see the other people's solutions that they have for code that you would have written or that you have written, or conceptually how they approach something completely, people did it completely different than I even imagined. So it was really cool to kind of see that. Yeah, and so part of the challenge, you have to write the test, and their challenge is to get these tests to be green. And that helps you as a developer figure out what test you would write to make this code pass. And so like, given, I call this, pull names out of a hat with this array of names, and I'm expecting, this response. How do you write tests for that? So it's a really good practice as well.
All right.
Cool.
Seems like, hey, give it up for Jason Welch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Are you going to hang out for a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, I'll be around. Yep.
Okay, so, yeah, thanks, everybody. Again, thank you to IDX for hosting the space. Thank you to Pizza My Cart. They're right over here by US Bank. I highly suggest you go get more slices from them. Let them know you came here. Maybe we'll get a discount someday. But yeah, thanks for coming.
You got to do the Cloudflare thing.
I can do that in a minute. It's fine. Thanks for coming. Yeah, we have the next meetup last Thursday of the next month. That's going to be for the hackathon, Hack for a Cause. We're going to be talking about that and have a few people here. Daniel, where's he at? There he is. If you want to bug him right now, about the experience at Hack for a Cause. And so, thanks again for coming, everybody. We'll see you next month. Feel free to hang out and talk. Welch is here, so you can come bug him about more questions or anything else, or any of us here.